With the latest agriculture news from across the state and nation, it's time for the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. Here's your host, Sabrina Halverson.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us this morning on the AgNet News Hour. Coming up later, we talk with Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack about USDA's efforts to assist producers impacted by the recent hurricanes down south. But we start today with a different discussion on the White House. Joining us now is Ethan Lane, Vice President of Government Affairs for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. Ethan, thank you for taking some time for us this morning. I do always appreciate your time.
You bet. Happy to do it.
I wanted to talk about the White House event that was held earlier this week. And just for full transparency, I want you to know that I was invited to attend, but because my focus right now is on hurricane and our producers in the Southeast, I wasn't able to go. I am a little bit in the dark as to exactly what happened there, as to not have seen it myself as a reporter.
Sure.
That said, I'd like to talk about the NCBA statement that came out with your disappointment with the event itself. What was your take? And I know that also NCBA was not invited to be there along with other animal groups.
And other group, that wheat wasn't invited. There were a bunch of commodities that weren't invited.
Yeah. So tell me, what's your take on this?
It's an odd event. We had quite a few of our affiliates received invitations back in September. The invitations were very vague. They talked about a chance to come to the White House and talk about the historic work that the Biden administration has done for farmers and ranchers. No mention of the competition, Bidenomics agenda. No mention of any of those really divisive niche topics that this administration has spent so much time on. And the advice we gave the affiliates that were invited, our affiliates that were invited, was, hey, if you want a chance to go to the White House, is probably a good one, but it sounds like a general kind of raw for the administration. And then the evening before, we were informed by USDA that they planned to introduce all of these competition items, this advance notice of preliminary rulemaking on nationalizing a base price for cattle and some of this meat marketing research, draft research that they've completed. And then press the next morning that the White House had clearly informed that was talking about this sort of niche group of producer groups that was going to be attending, and very much with a bent towards groups like Farm Action, which the Animal Ag Alliance in the last year has identified as an animal activist extremist group, rather than the ag group that they would like to portray themselves as well as others. Farm Bureau was in attendance, I think, as they usually are, regardless of the topic. I think if it's ag related, most administrations feel like they need to check that box and have Farm Bureau there. But definitely a different event than what was advertised, I think, to those that were invited a few weeks back. Obviously, I think they spent more time on the hurricanes and their recovery efforts than they had originally planned to when the event was started, because the hurricanes hadn't occurred at that point. And I think the administration does deserve probably more credit than they're getting for their hurricane response. There's been a lot of misinformation out there on the hurricane, and certainly that's not what we were trying to get across, but we were trying to get across in our press release the point that there's a lot going on out there right now, and engaging in this kind of campaign style, look at all the great stuff we're doing for this very niche group of aggrieved producers, is a little bit off the mark given the amount of actual producers in need right now. And that doesn't detract from the work they're doing. Maybe the focus should stay there instead of on some of this other stuff.
Was there anything specifically that really got to you and that the NCBA would have an alternate view on?
The cattle industry is a big, diverse industry. There are a lot of viewpoints. We have a lot of state affiliates with very different policies. Nothing is ever clean when it comes to cattle markets and how we price cattle and all that kind of stuff. Whenever you see an administration coming in claiming to fix the cattle market or in any other way insert themselves into the free market at the request of a very small group of producers to the detriment of the majority of producers out there, and doing so in a very blatant way, it is off-putting. It's disrespectful to hundreds of thousands of cattle producers across the country who have built their businesses around making premiums for investments they have made in higher and higher quality cattle. And to disregard that and say, we're going to nationalize this process in order to make sure everybody gets paid the same, regardless of what you put into your cattle, is disrespectful to a lot of families around the country that have put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into building a business. So yeah, that absolutely is objectionable to us and something we felt like needed to be called out.
I find it very interesting, the idea of everybody being paid the same, like you said, no matter just across the board, no matter what they put into their cattle. For our listeners who are not in the cattle industry, can you explain that a little bit better?
Yeah, a lot of cattle in the US right now are priced on what they would refer to, we refer to as an AMA, an alternative marketing agreement. Something like 80 some percent of fed cattle, finished cattle ready for processing, are priced using a tool like that. And what that means is the seller of those finished cattle, typically a feeder, and the packer that's going to process them will come to an agreement on some sort of base price. A lot of times that'll be a regional base price that reflects the dynamics for those cattle in that individual region. And then they'll pre-agree to a series of premiums and discounts based on the quality of the cattle. Whatever percentage grades choice or prime, you might get a premium on that. Whatever percentage grades select, you might get a discount on that. Cattle that are not treated with hormones might receive a premium. Things that qualify for certified Angus beef or some other value-added program are going to receive a premium. It's a predetermined way to say, look, whatever you bring me, this is what we've agreed we're gonna do as far as payment to make sure you're getting paid on the things that have value. And it sends market signals that way all the way to the cow-calf sector so that our cattle producers around the country can make some plans and know where to put investments, whether that be in genetics or whether that be in production practices, to make more money on those cattle year over year and grow their businesses. So that has really become kind of a flashpoint for folks that don't market their cattle that way, whether it's because they sell on the cash market, in the middle of the country, Iowa, Minnesota, places like that. There's a much higher percentage of that fed cattle market that trades in sale barns and on the cash market, more than 50% in some areas, as opposed to in the teens down in the southern plains in that area. And this has been a long-standing kind of clash between those different production models. And from NCBA's perspective, our policy is fairly clear that our members have given us from across the country, that we want to show respect to all of those different methods and let producers choose which method they market their cattle with, whether they find value in that system of AMAs or whether they find value in a direct cash transaction to sell those cattle. That's why this has been such a flashpoint whenever we see an administration or Congress or anybody else come in and say, no, only one way is correct, and we're going to mandate that people have to trade their cattle that way. That is where you start to see the members of NCBA around the country really get their back up and say, wait a minute, that's not the government's job to tell me how to market my cattle. That's not what fairness means to me, but it always seems to be centered on this idea that there's a disparity in how people are getting paid, and so when you look at that, you look at what would be the effects of government intervention in that market. It's going to be a limitation of those choices for producers. Limiting those choices gives the packers more leverage rather than less to dictate a price, and the end result of that is going to be more commoditization of those prices and ultimately of the underlying cattle. If there's no incentive to make investments in quality because you're going to get paid the same, those historic quality levels that we're enjoying right now in the industry and that are helping to drive demand could evaporate. And that's a real challenge for producers.
We're talking with Ethan Lane, Vice President of Government Affairs for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. We have to take a quick break, but we will be back right after this.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halverson.
We're chatting with Ethan Lane, Vice President of Government Affairs for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. So coming back to the White House event, it looked like an opportunity for the White House to reach out to a rural audience and try to connect with rural America ahead of the election, especially. What would you say would be a better way to reach out to rural America and producers?
I think it's always the problem with Washington, right? Whenever people have been in elected positions or Senate confirmed positions in Washington for too long, they start believing that they are the experts on what folks in the country need. And so whenever you are a government official that finds yourself telling rural America, we're here to help you and we're going to tell you what you need, rather than actually listening when rural America tells you, no, you've missed the mark, we actually need something different than that, that's a problem. So I would recommend starting with recognizing that there is a broad base of producers out there who have very different views on this, and starting there rather than placating, those niche groups that maybe are more inclined to vote for a Democratic administration. I think most of the press around this has acknowledged groups like the National Farmers Union are fairly heavily left-leaning. I think the same could be said on a lot of issues for U.S. Cattlemen and RCAF and groups like that. Despite a lot of their individual members being Trump fans or things like that, they tend to take a more sort of progressive liberal view of the government's involvement in the marketplace. That would be my advice, is recognize the broad diversity of opinions in rural America and welcome all those voices in rather than just catering to the echo chamber that tends to agree with you.
And do you have any other final comments or thoughts on that?
I don't think so.
Okay. Is it okay if I switch gears and ask about the CBA sent out a news release about hurricane relief? And I was wondering if you'd like to just give a comment for our cattle producers down in the Southeast.
Yeah, happy to. We are continuing to talk with USDA staff daily. We're continuing to provide them as much information as we can about where there are stress points on the ground. This area in the Southeast is not used to responding to disasters like this the same way that some of our fire-prone areas in the West are. And this industry always does. I think producers have really stepped up with offers for hay, for resources, fencing, all of the things that we know are in short supply around the Southeast in those hurricane damaged areas. And that is incredible. But there's so much coordination that needs to be done. There are so many roads that still need to get opened up in order to even get those supplies somewhere where they can be helpful. So I would encourage folks to keep checking in with state cattlemen's associations. They're going to be your first line of defense that really understand what's happening on the ground. Keep passing that information along. We're going to keep passing everything we get to USDA and others so that they can make sure they're getting help where it's needed, and keep watching for releases from us and others where we're passing along links to where producers can go to get support, to get resources, to get access to programs to help make them whole on damages that they're experiencing. USDA has done a good job of getting those resources compiled and getting them out there, and we're trying to echo that. Look for those reliable channels of information and make sure you really leverage those to either get support that you need if you're in those damaged areas, or to find out the best ways to truly help if you are in an area where you're watching this in horror and wanting to be helpful in some way.
And that was going to be the next thing that I asked you, is for our listeners who are not in those areas, but in California or in other areas, who are wondering, what can we do to help our fellow cattle producers? Is there anything they can do?
Yeah, there's a list of links that we sent out earlier this week, and they're on our website, ncba.com/org/policy. So often, as is the case with these things, it really is that state cattlemen's association that has the ability to receive funds and get those funds directly to the ground. If you're watching this from some other part of the country, that is the best place to engage there. Reach out to North Carolina cattlemen, reach out to Georgia cattlemen, and get them some resources to those links that are provided. That's the best way to mainline some help directly to where it can be the most effective for those producers.
Thank you again so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you.
Now, as I mentioned earlier, we are going to talk with Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack later in the show, and we'll get his comments on this as well. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halverson, and we'll be back in just a moment.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halverson.
We're joined now by Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack to talk about USDA's efforts to help those affected by Hurricane Helene and Milton. Thank you for taking some time out for us today. I really appreciate it. Do you want to start off with just telling a little bit about what USDA is doing?
Sure. Well, obviously, our hearts, thoughts, and prayers are extended to all those who have been devastated by the destruction of these storms. It's just been heartbreaking to hear of the stories. And actually, I was with the president in Florida and Georgia talking to those who have lost their homes and farms. Very, very difficult time. So USDA's responsibility is obviously to provide us help and assistance right now, working in a collaborative and comprehensive way with FEMA to make sure that we have boots on the ground and that we're basically taking the steps to help people get through this first stage of dealing with the storm and the aftermath of the storms. First of all, making sure that people get fed. That's why we've created flexibilities in our SNAP program. Those who receive financial assistance from the government to basically buy groceries, they may not have their card. They may have lost their card. So we are providing easy opportunities for replacements. The utilization of those cards to buy hot meals instead of having to buy groceries because they may not have the ability to actually produce and prepare meals because their kitchen has been destroyed or their home has been devastated. That opportunity for us to work with schools to make sure that youngsters have the opportunity to have meals, and if they can't be served at school, to make sure that they have a congregate meal site or a opportunity for sort of a grab and go, similar to what we did during the pandemic. So a lot of flexibilities on the nutrition side. In terms of farmers, ranchers, and producers, it is all about making sure that we have people prepared and able to staff those offices to begin the process of processing all the applications. We have literally 8 or 9 different programs designed to provide assistance for farmers, everything from crop insurance to the livestock indemnity program to emergency conservation assistance that may require farmers to provide applications and information. We have instructed our crop insurance agents to be as flexible as possible in terms of loss documentation. In fact, we want to get payments out on some of the storms as quickly as possible. We anticipate under the wind and hurricane coverage that we may be able to get payments out as early as this November. So we're excited and anxious to make sure that we do everything we possibly can to get folks the help that they need as quickly as possible. We're sending surge teams from outside states and from inside the states of unaffected and impacted areas to those offices once they are prepared to be open to make sure that we're there to service the farmers. NRCS is working to make sure that farmers are aware of the debris removal emergency conservation programs that are available to apply for resources to get the debris removed. We want to make sure that we're working through our rural development program to provide housing units for those who've lost their homes. We have rental units that may have extra apartments that may be available and used. We want APHIS to be focused on helping folks deal with their pets. So it's a comprehensive approach with over 260 people from USDA alone, basically manning the regional and national offices to sort of oversee and to coordinate all of the activities with other federal agencies that are working collaboratively with us and we with them to restore power, to open up roads and bridges, to provide housing, to provide assistance for folks who have lost maybe their house is still intact, but the roof has been destroyed. But with a covering and things of that nature, they can get back into their home. There's just a whole series of things that we're doing in a concerted and comprehensive effort to try to respond to the immediacy of these storms. And then we'll begin the process, obviously, of the recovery phase once we get through this initial stage.
With two such, devastating disasters back to back like this, that has got to put an additional strain on all of these resources. In addition, there's a lot of USDA staff that lives in these areas. And you mentioned moving staff around to, try to help alleviate some of that. Putting a focus on that, how is USDA working in those areas?
Well, as I mentioned, we have what are called surge teams. These are additional people that come in from outside a state that's not been impacted by the storms to help supplement and complement or to provide opportunities for additional staff in these offices. We also are moving people in the state that are coming from counties that weren't impacted by the storm. And so it's a combination of out-of-state and in-state folks basically going to where the need is and where the work is going to be most significant over the course of the next several weeks and months. So we are making those arrangements right now. We've got teams moving right now to do that. So we're confident we're going to be able to man the offices and to provide this assistance and help. We have online capacity as well, to the extent that people have access to the internet. There's a disaster assistance online tool that would allow producers to take a look at the particular situation they're confronting, whether it's a flood or whether it's wind damage. It will list all of the programs that potentially are available for that producer. When they click on those programs, they'll get the name and contact information of someone who might be able to help them and assist them in making an application. We obviously want producers to be able to document as best they can under the circumstances, the losses that they've incurred, so that we can get payment to them as quickly as we can. And I mentioned that we're providing flexibility on the crop insurance side so that if they have records that have been destroyed as a result of the storm, that they're not penalized because of that. So with greater flexibility, trying to get payments to them as quickly as possible, making sure that the offices are fully and adequately staffed.
I'll admit that I've never, I've been very fortunate. I've never lived through a disaster such as this, but I have to imagine it's got to be a very confusing time for the people who are affected. Is there something that you would tell them, look, this is your first step or this is your next step, do this first, and then, continue on to get the help that you need?
I'd say a couple things. First of all, to the extent they can, documenting the losses that they've incurred obviously becomes very, very important. That can be done in a number of different ways, but having, to the extent that you're able to define the nature of your loss, particularly for farmers and ranchers and producers, that is extremely helpful and allows us to move forward in terms of crop insurance payments, in terms of the non-crop insurance assistance program payments, in terms of the livestock indemnity program payments, in terms of the forage program payments, and basically also documenting the conservation needs. If there's soil erosion or if lands have to be restored, basically documenting that and working collaboratively with folks to get that information as quickly as possible to FSA or crop insurance agents. That's number one. Number two, look, this is very stressful, and people need to know that there's a 24/7 hotline that they can utilize and call if they are just overwhelmed. That number is 888-381-7243, 888-381-7243. It is manned 24/7, and we would encourage folks to use that if and when they need to talk to somebody and just try to get themselves to a place where they're in a better state of mind.
Thank you for sharing that phone number. If you were able to, and I know that you have been able to talk with some of the people who are affected, but if you were able to speak to each one of them one-on-one, what message would you really want them to hear from you?
Well, that we are going to be there as quickly as we possibly can to provide as much help as we possibly can, as quickly as we can, as easily as we can, and that we're going to be there until we get ourselves back on our feet, until people get back to normal. This is not a sort of we'll be there at the beginning and then a week or two or a month from now we won't be there. The president's been very clear about this. We are there until all of the repair, the recovery, and the rehabilitation, and the revitalization of communities and of homes and of farms and ranches is done.
And that's going to be a very lengthy process for many people.
Look, I think all of us wish we could do this overnight. We wish we could put people back in their homes. We wish that there wasn't damage to the crops or livestock. But the reality is that's why we have insurance programs. That's why we have the various farm bill programs to provide help and assistance. That's why we have offices in virtually every county of the country to be able to service people. And this is what government does. And as I've often said, I think America is at its best and Americans are at their best in the worst of times. And obviously the folks in the southeast part of our country have gone through the worst of times. And it has been very, very difficult, no question about it. But there are a lot of people. In fact, I think there were over 8,000 federal employees that are currently sort of working on this disaster assistance effort right now in a variety of ways. The Energy Department is making sure that 50,000 individuals who are capable of repairing electric lines are coming into those states that have been impacted by these storms to restore power. The Department of Defense is providing blue tarps so that people can basically put that over their roof if it's been destroyed and basically be able to continue to stay in their home if they still have a home. FEMA is working to provide people resources, financial resources, as well as housing assistance to sort of get to a point where there's at least some semblance of normal for these folks. So there are a lot of people working, and they will continue to work 24/7 to try to provide the help and assistance that people need.
We're talking with Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack. We will continue with the Agriculture Secretary right after this.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halverson.
We're speaking with Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack, originally called to talk about the USDA's efforts to help those affected by Hurricanes Helene and Milton. But Secretary, another story that I'm covering today is the NCBA's reaction to the White House Farmers and Ranchers event. I wanted to give you the opportunity to give a statement or a response to their thoughts that they were left out and that it was animal rights activists who were involved in the event.
Well, first of all, the statement sort of reflects the concern that many of us have about misinformation and disinformation that seems to get into the into the public discourse. I think I'm pretty sure that Zippy Duvall, who is the head of the American Farm Bureau, would not consider himself a animal rights activist. Zippy was in the audience, and so there were a number of farm leaders that were in the audience. There are a number of opportunities that we create to have interaction with people in agriculture. And it's unfortunate that NCBA sort of decided to put the statement out. Here's a couple of things that I think you need to be aware of. First of all, they suggested we weren't focused on disaster relief. Well, that's just not right. That's just misinformation. That's disinformation. That's just flat out wrong. And they know better. And it doesn't do any good to suggest that this administration is not focused on disaster assistance. The president has been down there. The vice president has been engaged. Every cabinet member is engaged. I've been in cabinet meetings where we have outlined a tremendous effort that's undertaken, and it does a disservice to the thousands of federal employees that are working night and day to try to help folks out. And it's just unfortunate. That's number one. Number two, they suggested that, mentioned exports. Well, we've had the 4 best year of ag exports in the history of the country in the last 4 years. They talked about income. Well, the net cash farm income for livestock producers was up this year. And in fact, it's been up for 5 consecutive years, including every year of this administration. They suggested we should be focused on the industry. Well, we've invested $1.4 billion in expanded processing capacity and 234 projects that are expanding opportunities for more cattle to be essentially processed to help and assist their members in having competition and better prices. In fact, the purpose of the White House meeting was in part to roll out an effort to try to begin the process of having even better pricing mechanisms for cattle producers in the country. I would think they would be for that. So it's unfortunate that folks felt the need to put out some misinformation and disinformation, but I think we'll continue to do the job of focusing on farm income and expanding exports and increasing markets, more and new and better markets, and making sure they're fair for cattle producers. That's what we've been doing for the last 4 years, and we're going to continue to do that.
Thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate you spending some time with us today.
You bet.
This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halverson, and we will be back in just a moment. This segment is brought to you by Live Earth Products. To get to know a little more about Live Earth Products, we're talking on the phone today with Vice President Russell Taylor. What about humates in animal feed? When can you add humates to the animal feed, and what is the benefit of that?
So the interesting thing about animal feeds is just like the fertilizer side, there's actually a lot going on in legislative processes. So there's an act out called the Innovative Feed Act. And currently, you can't include things in animal feed that are giving you other benefits besides nutritive benefits. Let's say, for example, you had a cow that was eating a product that reduced its methane emissions, those enteric gases that are caused just in the natural digestion of a ruminating cow. You can't claim that those products do that benefit. So hopefully people will get involved and say, look, the Innovative Feed Act is necessary and should help farmers. Other benefits of feeding humate is obviously first to reduce enteric gases. But the second one, these are old plant materials. So those plant materials are rich in trace minerals. So not only are you getting something that's going to help the digestion of the animal, you're also getting an abundant supply of minerals. So that is the main reason farmers are currently including in their animal feeds.
This is all fascinating, but it can be hard to retain some of this information when you're hearing this on the radio or through the podcast. So is there someplace online, or where can our listeners go and get more information?
Well, the good news is the acts I mentioned, like the Innovative Feed Act and the Plant Biostimulant Act, are publicly available through Congress. You can actually go look at those acts. They're on the website there. The other information you can get is directly through Live Earth Products. So if you go to liveearth.com, contact us. You can contact us and our agronomy team. And we're happy to go over any details, questions about how to use these products, how they fit your farm program, how to use them as a tool to implement conservation practices such as nutrient retention, water conservation, and improving soil health.
To get to know more about Live Earth Products, you can visit them online at liveearth.com. That is spelled LIVEARTH.com.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halverson.
Joining us on the phone now is Samantha Buchalter. She is the Vice President at the Russell Group, which is a boutique food and agriculture lobbying and consulting firm. So I wanted to talk to you today about the Food and Agriculture Climate Alliance. And to start off with, would you just tell our listeners what the alliance is?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Food and Agriculture Climate Alliance launched in 2020, and really the intention was to bring together a variety of voices and different perspectives. So we have commodity groups, environmental and conservation groups, all at the table together, developing proactive policy positions on federal climate policy. We support policies that are voluntary, market, and incentive-based, that advance science-based outcomes, promote resilience, and focus on helping adaptation in rural communities. We support policies that ensure equitable opportunities and recognize that in agriculture, there is not a one-size-fits-all solution. And we support policies, most importantly, I think, that are strongly bipartisan. But the goal was always to ensure that the agriculture, forestry industry had strong positions and was united behind positions, I think, for the first time as a broad industry around climate.
So recently, the Commodities Futures Trading Commission took some steps involving the voluntary carbon marketplace, and the Food and Agriculture Climate Alliance applauded this. Can you tell me a little bit about what it was that the CFTC did and why you see this as a positive?
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to December of last year, December 2023, the CFTC issued a proposed guidance document around voluntary carbon credit derivative contracts. It was the most comprehensive and one of the first, I think, attempts at some sort of regulatory framework for the voluntary carbon marketplace. It's important to know that the CFTC lacks authority under the Commodity Exchange Act to generally govern or regulate spot commodity markets, so as opposed to derivative markets. So really what they are doing is proposing voluntary guidance, and I'm still talking about the original proposal in December, and I'll get to the final guidance that the Food and Agriculture Climate Alliance reacted to in a moment. But essentially, the CFTC, for the first time ever, said we're going to leverage our authorities that we do have to regulate the exchanges. So futures contracts markets, let's think about the CME, for example. We are proposing to put some due diligence requirements on the exchanges to ensure that any carbon credits exchanged or traded on that exchange meets some sort of standardization requirements. And the goal here, really driven by Chairman Russ Benham, who chairs the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, was to bring some sort of integrity and confidence to the marketplace. I think that for a long time, we've really viewed the voluntary carbon markets as a great revenue generating opportunity for food and agriculture. But really, when you look at the credits that are actually being traded to date, very few are in the ag space. More broadly, I think we're looking at forestry credits. I think that's for a couple different reasons. I think that one, you need to know that when you are buying a carbon credit, that it truly signifies X amount of metric tons of greenhouse gas is avoided, destroyed, reduced, however you want to define it. And I think there's been some questions about the integrity behind some carbon credits today, and some of the, pause here, some questions behind carbon credits to date. And really, I think the CFTC decided to leverage some of their authorities over, again, the exchanges to say, okay, we're going to do what we can to bring some standardization to market. So the CFTC really laid out a set of criteria that a carbon credit should meet in order to be exchanged, or in order to be traded on the exchanges with which the CFTC does regulate. Sorry, that's a little wonky. But I think the general premise and the intent behind the CFTC guidance is something that the Food and Agriculture strongly supports. Again, I really think that we view this evolving nascent marketplace as a promising opportunity, but we've got to get it right. Because if something comes out that carbon credits traded in this space, let's say 2 years from now, don't actually represent X amount of metric tons of greenhouse gases reduced or avoided, then that market opportunity is going to take 5 steps back. And I think we want to see it go in the positive direction. So we recognize that getting it right is incredibly important. And I think that the CFTC under Chairman Benham's leadership has really been trying to figure out where they can assert their authority to do. But they have, with this final guidance that was released in September, they are saying we're going to put some requirements on the exchanges to do their own due diligence.
First off, let me just say that anytime we're reporting on the climate market, the carbon markets, it's convoluted. These interviews are always, it's such a complex issue and it's such a complex topic. So thank you for doing what you can to help explain this to me as well as to the listeners. Um, with the CFTC's new guidance on the carbon credits, do you think that there's a place for that to be shaping the future of voluntary carbon markets with it coming from the CFTC?
I think yes and no, which is not a great answer, but I think that the CFTC, yes, is working to use their authorities to bring some integrity and build confidence within those markets. You're going to hear me say integrity and confidence, transparency, those types of terms, very important. However, it's also important to know that there are a lot of kind of rules in the international space that really govern the voluntary carbon markets. And a lot of these are voluntary, but they set the standards or the frameworks that carbon credits should adhere to. And what the CFTC did is they evaluated the landscape. They looked at what these international efforts have already done. The ICBCM is one example that they examined, and they really said, okay, these global benchmarks for high quality carbon credits, there's some stuff here that we really want to adopt and we strongly believe in. And we believe that our role is to bring greater confidence to the marketplace. So let's review the international voluntary bodies that have already established or are actively developing these global benchmarks. Let's figure out what we can support and lift up, and let's bring some greater standardization to this space. The CFTC is a regulator, so this does get a little bit complicated, but again, they regulate those exchanges. So it's all voluntary. It's important to know the CFTC is a regulator, but what they have put out is voluntary guidance for the exchanges. But they are trying to move the needle in one direction and for that needle to really align with these international or global benchmarks that already exist for to create what would be considered a high quality carbon credit. So they propose this, they're putting forth a framework, but that framework is not from scratch. They have really already surveyed what's out there. And I think that they have looked at the leading global benchmarks and really tried to adopt certain pieces from that still fall within their authority.
There are a lot of keywords, like you said, that we will hear you say, like integrity and transparency, and these are important when it comes to the carbon marketplace, especially with it being so new and complex. What are some ways to help keep things transparent and maintain like consistent integrity when all of these it's new ground and things are just being formed, regulations or voluntary efforts? How can we really focus on keeping that integrity?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will just say this is a rapidly evolving segment and market, right? So there's evolving science that informs these standards that govern them. And that's really important to know, especially in the agriculture space. And I think a lot of times when we are thinking about the voluntary bodies that are developing and implementing that set, they call it kind of core principles, but let's say a common understanding of what creates a high quality carbon credit, there may be a lack of understanding or education in agriculture specifically. So it's really important that we have the right stakeholders at the table. It's important to know we're talking about the CFTC, but one thing that our coalition has done is we've encouraged the CFTC to work very closely with the U.S. Department of Agriculture because they understand and they serve the agriculture audience here in the U.S. And USDA has been given new authorities through the Growing Climate Solutions Act. And part of those new authorities are to stand up a new program called the Greenhouse Gas Technical Assistance and Third-Party Verifier Program. It's a really long name, but they are establishing this new program to really help producers navigate these emerging market opportunities and to better understand all of these terms, these opportunities at hand, how it impacts their farm, what would they be signing. USDA will be endorsing, essentially, they'll be creating a website really, but where they put up new resources and they put together a list of technical assistance providers who can really help producers navigate these issues, as well as third-party verifiers they would be involved in the on-farm verification that you are meeting a certain set of criteria as prescribed in, let's say, a carbon market program protocol. But USDA is really the missing piece here. And I think what CFTC is great. It's going to help move everybody in the same direction. They cannot do that without communicating and coordinating really closely with USDA, who's going to have a key role in this moving forward as soon as they get this new program off the ground.
What would you say are some of the biggest challenges that producers are facing when participating in or planning to participate in these voluntary carbon markets? And what can organizations like the Coalition do to help address the challenges?
Absolutely. We know that to date, participation among landowners and operators remains low. There's a number of factors impacting this, including one, just the limited return on investment, because there's really high transaction costs. What do I mean by high transaction costs? Think of cost to quantify the greenhouse gas reductions and removals, the cost for verification, the cost for reporting, registration fees, any compliance costs. So that all to date has led to generally limited return on investment. Two, just general high upfront costs to implement new projects, just the general data collection and record keeping burdens that plague an operator. Farmers want to farm, we all get this. Restrictions on early adopter participation. So farmers or landowners who maybe several years ago started transitioning to different conservation practices may not be able to participate in some of these new markets depending on how their protocols are structured. I think sometimes there's permanence requirements that don't necessarily reflect the realities of what we all know happen on farm. And then again, that lack of education, lack of awareness, general confusion, opaque contracts, all different barriers to, I think, producer participation. And we as a coalition, we recognize this. Our coalition is really united in promoting voluntary, again, keyword, and market-based policies. So we see this as a potential revenue generator and a great emerging opportunity. But we also recognize that the federal government has a role to play in providing that technical assistance to producers in navigating these new opportunities. So CFTC, what they are doing, they're focusing on standardization. Again, it's all voluntary, but that they're trying to move the markets in one direction to form criteria and support criteria that promote a high quality carbon credit. USDA, on the other hand, really can play a role in providing that technical assistance and capacity support for producers to better understand the opportunities at hand. So we support all of that, and also just recognize that this is really a wonky space and we need to have patience, and most importantly, we need to have flexibility. And we need to ensure that the folks that are setting these rules in place really have a solid understanding of agriculture. And that's why we're at the table, and that's why we are engaging with these entities and these agencies, because we feel like if we're not at the table, you're on the table.
All right. And again, it is just such a complicated topic completely. Is there some place where people can get more information or maybe learn more about the coalition itself? Do you have a website that they should go to?
Absolutely. Our website is www.agclimatealliance.com. We also are really excited that USDA is going to be launching a new website with resources on just carbon markets generally. So I would tell folks to be on the lookout for USDA's launch of their new greenhouse gas technical assistance and third-party verifier program, because they'll be listing a ton of resources. But if anybody ever has any questions too, please reach out through the coalition's website page and we can better direct you to resources as well.
Thank you again, Samantha. That's today's top agriculture news. I'm Sabrina Halverson. Thank you for sharing your morning with us.
To get more information on the topics you heard today, visit AgNet West at agnetwest.com. You can also stay connected by following us on our social media at AgNet West on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Also look for Sabrina Halverson on Facebook and be sure to subscribe to our podcast by searching for AgNet West on your podcast app. Thank you for listening to the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. AgNet West Radio Network, your primary choice for agriculture news.